A cold strip of light cuts across his suitcase as he smiles like nothing's breaking, and I stand in the doorway feeling every part of this moment strain against itself, as if the room is holding its breath alongside me, while the flickering bulb above our heads stutters in and out of clarity, throwing small shards of brightness across his hands as he adjusts the zipper. He moves with a softness that feels rehearsed, almost tender, but something beneath that polished surface fractures a tension he tries to bury under that calm smile, and I feel the familiar tightness in my chest, the accountant in me silently noting every detail he wants me to ignore. The suitcase is new, sleek, expensive, subtly monogrammed, something he bought without mentioning, and the way he places it near the door tells me it's not for a routine trip. It's for a life he's already begun packing himself into. He turns slightly, letting just enough light catch his profile, and I watch how the flickering bulb shapes him into two halves, the man I married 8 years ago, and the man who can't meet my eyes long enough for me to recognize him. I say his name once softly, but he answers with a tone crafted to make me feel inconvenient, as if my voice disrupts the script he's memorized. He picks up his jacket, pausing when his second phone, yes, the one he doesn't know I've noticed, vibrates lightly on the dresser. He moves too fast, sliding it into his pocket before the screen fully lights, and for a fraction of a second his smile slips, revealing something cold, something sharpened by contempt or fear, or both. I track every movement, studying his shoulders, the rhythm of his breathing, the way he refuses to stand fully in the light, as though brightness might expose the truth he's hiding. The bulb continues flickering above us, bathing the walls in a restless pulse, and I catch myself counting the intervals between each blink, a habit formed from years of analyzing patterns that others overlook. He walks past me, muttering about being late, but there's no meeting, no schedule, nothing on his calendar matching this rush to leave. I ask where he's going, keeping my voice steady, and he offers a vague explanation that dissolves before it fully forms, claiming a last-minute client crisis. But I know his crises usually begin with an email, not a suitcase packed too neatly, too decisively. His smile pretends to care while his eyes beg me not to question anything. I step closer, intentionally blocking his path just enough to force him to acknowledge me, and I see the flicker of annoyance he tries to smother. He looks at me like someone evaluating risk, not affection. And I feel something deep inside me shift, not breaking but rearranging, taking shape in a way I'm not ready to define. The suitcase rests between us like an argument we haven't spoken yet, a confession he hopes I won't ask for. He adjusts his collar, smoothing the fabric with controlled movements, and tells me not to wait up, his voice too calm for someone supposedly dealing with a crisis. The flickering bulb casts another cold flash across the suitcase, and for a heartbeat the scene freezes into something almost photograph-like. His polished shoes angled toward the door, the suitcase ready, his jaw tight, his posture stiff with impatience. I search his face, trying to find remnants of the man who used to bring me coffee just the way I liked it, the man who celebrated my small victories, the man who wasn't yet wrapped in whatever new wealth has taught him to crave distance. But wealth didn't change him. It revealed him, and I didn't fully see it until this second. He avoids my eyes again, tugging gently on the handle of his suitcase, but that small tremor in his hand betrays him, a tremor he doesn't know I see because he turns away too quickly. I catch sight of the reflection in the window, his back retreating, mine standing still, and the distance between those two images feels like a story I haven't read yet. One he's already tried to rewrite without telling me. The flickering bulb buzzes faintly, giving the moment a strange metallic echo, and I wonder why he didn't change the bulb, even though I asked him 2 days ago. He changed everything else after all. He tells me again not to wait up sharper this time, and I let the words settle into the air like dust refusing to fall. His hand rests on the doorknob for a moment longer than necessary, as though he's waiting for me to say something that will let him leave without guilt. But guilt requires honesty, and he has none left to offer. I inhale slowly, sensing that the truth is closer than his excuses and heavier than his suitcase. I don't stop him when he finally pulls the door open, but I memorize the angle of his shoulders, the pace of his breath, the look he gives me before stepping into the hallway, a look that feels like goodbye, disguised as routine. I feel the moment cracking even as he pretends nothing has changed. The door shuts behind him, leaving the flickering bulb struggling to light the room he abandoned in pieces. The suitcase wheels click against the hallway floor, fading, and I stand still listening until I can't hear him anymore. The final flash from the bulb freezes the empty doorway long enough for me to recognize one truth, something in him already left before his body followed. The silence he leaves behind presses against my ribs as the last flicker dies, and I see the room settle around me, holding the shape of what he didn't say. The air feels colder than before, heavier, waiting for something to catch up to it. And as I look at the door he walked through, the truth unravels in one quiet certainty. He's not coming back the same way he left. A thin pulse of dread slides beneath my skin as the bulb flickers one last time, carving his absence into the room like a warning. The stillness sharpens, sealing the moment into something I can't yet name. The night closes around me, thick with unanswered questions, and the faint electric buzz of something breaking where I can't see it, leaving me anchored in a darkness that suddenly feels intentional. The cold light holds the doorway like a secret waiting to surface. I'm Claire Mason, 34, an accountant from Evanston, Illinois. That's the line I always use when people ask for introductions, but it never felt as heavy as it did that night when everything in my life was still balanced on the illusion that stability could be trusted. Back then, before I traced timelines, before I learned the shapes of lies in dim light, before I discovered the edges of the truth Daniel tried to bury. I still believed routine could protect me from change. I remember coming home to the soft hum of our apartment's heating system and the faint echo of my own footsteps on the wood floor, a rhythm I'd memorized over years. I reached for the cold doorknob, noticing the unnatural chill in the metal, as if someone had opened the door just moments before I arrived. The detail felt out of place, but at that time I chalked it up to winter drafts, slipping through old weather stripping. I stepped inside, carrying the quiet exhaustion of a long workday, the kind that left my shoulders stiff and my mind heavy with numbers that refused to settle neatly. Daniel had texted me earlier, saying he'd be late, something about a client needing last-minute revisions. Not unusual, not alarming, not anything more than a small disappointment I'd grown used to ignoring. I dropped my bag on the chair by the kitchen counter and loosened my coat, noticing the faint glow under the bedroom door, a warm light that spilled across the hallway in a thin strip. Daniel shouldn't have been home yet, but maybe he forgot to turn the lamp off before leaving, a habit he had, even though he scolded me for it. I moved quietly through the apartment, listening for the sounds of running water or movement, anything to explain the light. Instead, I heard a soft vibration, muffled but distinct, coming from behind the closed door. It wasn't the familiar tone of his regular phone. It was fainter, buried beneath something like a device set to silent but not fully muted. I felt a small pinch of confusion but reminded myself not to leap to conclusions. I pushed the bedroom door open slowly, expecting to find an empty room bathed in lamplight, but instead I saw Daniel standing near the dresser, his posture stiff, his hand hovering over something I couldn't see. He startled slightly when he heard me, recovering quickly with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. I asked when he got home, and he answered too casually, as if reciting a line he'd prepared. He said he returned 10 minutes ago, but the cold doorknob told me otherwise, and the warmth in the room suggested he'd been here longer. I didn't question it. I wasn't ready to. I moved past him, heading toward the bathroom to wash up, and that's when I heard it, the unmistakable murmur of his voice following me down the hall. He was whispering too low for me to catch the words, but the cadence was unmistakable. He was talking to someone. I paused outside the bathroom, waiting for him to finish, expecting to hear him wrap up a call. Maybe laugh lightly, maybe shift the tone he used with clients. Instead, I heard silence. Complete silence. When I stepped out a moment later and asked if he'd been on the phone, he offered a quick denial, claiming he was reading an email aloud to himself to check phrasing. That explanation was too odd, but I let it pass, telling myself people mutter sometimes, especially when stressed. I remember noticing the reflection of his silhouette in the hallway window, distorted slightly by the glass bending at the edges. That was the moment the motif seed formed in my mind. Without naming itself, glass reflection bends where his truth should be. I didn't know then how literal that would become. Daniel moved around the room, tidying blankets, stacking a pair of books on the nightstand, small, unnecessary tasks that kept his hands busy and his eyes averted. It made me wonder what he didn't want me to ask. I watched him walk toward the living room, his steps too deliberate, as if he needed to control the space between us. I followed him slowly, observing how he flinched almost imperceptibly when his second phone vibrated again inside the desk drawer. I pretended not to hear it, and he pretended nothing happened. The tension thickened like steam against glass. I asked if everything was okay at work. He said yes too quickly, then corrected himself mid-sentence, shifting the description of his day just enough for me to notice the inconsistency. He asked me about my schedule for the next week, casually, almost lightly, but there was a probing tone beneath the words, something testing the boundaries of my time. I answered, and he nodded slowly, memorizing details that didn't require remembering unless he needed them for something else. His phone buzzed again, louder this time, and he stiffened. He claimed it was a spam alert and stepped away to check it privately. I tried to ignore the twist in my stomach, telling myself that people deserve privacy, that marriage doesn't mean surveillance, that trust grows from giving space. But space, I would later learn, is exactly where betrayal breathes best. I made tea to steady myself, holding the warm cup between my palms, grounding my thoughts. Daniel returned, smiling with a strange tightness, not the warmth I once knew. He asked about my day, but his eyes wandered to the hallway repeatedly as though waiting for something. I told him about a small accounting error I fixed at work, about how satisfying it was to make numbers align perfectly again. He nodded absently, but I saw something change in his face, like the idea of things aligning unsettled him. That should have been a sign, but I missed it. The rest of the evening unfolded in small, quiet moments. Him scrolling through his phone with his brightness dimmed almost to black, me reading on the couch while watching his reflection in the TV screen, noticing how his expression softened only when he thought I wasn't looking. We went to bed with an invisible wall between us, something that had been forming slowly, carefully, quietly, without me tracking it the way I normally tracked everything else. As I lay beside him, listening to his breathing settle into a rhythm too calm for someone supposedly stressed from work, I realized there were entire parts of his life I no longer recognized. And though I didn't know the full shape of the truth yet, I knew something had shifted, something I couldn't unsee even if I wanted to. That was the night the first thread of certainty began to unravel, the night when the reflection in the window told a story his voice refused to speak. The cracked phone screen was the first thing that didn't belong in the neat geometry of our kitchen that morning, a small fracture catching a thin slice of sunlight like a wound trying too hard to hide. I remember pausing mid-step, my coffee mug half lifted, staring at the device Daniel claimed he only used for work emergencies, the one he always kept face down as if privacy were a matter of gravity. The hairline crack stretched diagonally across the corner like a secret trying to escape. I didn't touch it at first. I waited, watching the way the light bent across the broken glass, distorting the reflection of my fingers as I reached for the mug again. Daniel never cracked screens. He handled his devices with the same obsessive care he used to handle his image, smoothing every imperfection until only the polished parts survived. So the crack felt wrong, not catastrophic, just wrong in a quiet way that made my stomach tighten. I picked up the phone, gently planning to move it aside so I wouldn't spill coffee on it, but the screen lit up the moment my thumb brushed the corner, revealing a notification preview from a financial service I didn't recognize. The name flashed for a half second before fading. Trade Monisec. Not his usual bank, not his investment app. Something else entirely. I froze, pretending my breath hadn't caught. Daniel hadn't mentioned any new accounts, and he always talked about finances with the precision of a man who measured his worth in numbers. But this wasn't a number he wanted me to see. I set the phone back exactly where I found it, angle, and all because the smallest shift might tell him I touched something he didn't intend for me to notice. I finished my coffee, mechanically tracking details the way I did at work, small anomalies, mismatched patterns, clues without context. Later that afternoon, while sorting household receipts for the monthly budget, I found it the misaligned receipt that would become. I almost missed it. It was wedged between two grocery slips, folded awkwardly, as if shoved there in haste. Refresh ST19, amount discrepancy, $46 off, timestamp 3:42 p.m., location a cafe. Daniel claimed he hadn't visited in months. His alibi that day, client meeting near the Loop. I stared at the numbers, feeling a strange pull in my chest, a heaviness that grew as I compared the timestamp to the traffic report he mentioned that evening. His timeline didn't fit. It didn't even come close. When numbers don't align, there's always a reason, and reasons in my world never stay hidden for long. I placed the receipt on the table, slowly smoothing its edges with my fingers, my mind already running through the soft clicks of memory. Daniel arrived home in unusually good spirits, asking about dinner plans with a cheerfulness too bright for someone who allegedly dealt with a demanding client all day. He wrapped his arms around me, but his hug felt engineered, like something performed rather than given. His voice carried a strange lightness, and he avoided looking at the receipts scattered across the table. I asked him gently how his meeting had gone. He offered a vague summary using phrases like productive conversation and next steps, but none of it matched the timeline pinned to that crumpled slip of paper beneath my palm. I smiled anyway because confronting someone before the truth forms fully is like testing ice before the lake freezes, dangerous and pointless. Instead, I watched him pick up his cracked phone from the counter, his thumb hovering over the screen, just long enough for me to notice the tension in his jaw when the device flickered and froze for a second. He muttered something under his breath about needing a new case. He didn't look at me. He didn't ask why I was staring. He just swiped the screen and stepped away, eyes glued to the crack, as if it held the answers to questions he didn't want asked. That night after he fell asleep beside me with suspicious ease, I retrieved the receipt from my notebook, my future review folder where I stored anything that didn't fit neatly into the life we pretended was stable. The apartment was dim, illuminated only by the slanted glow of a street lamp outside. Daniel's cracked phone left on the nightstand caught a shard of a yellow light that made the fracture glow like a thin breaking horizon. The reflection on the screen stretched his sleeping face into something unfamiliar, a distorted version of the man I loved. His features bent slightly across the crack, splitting his expression into two halves, one calm, one tense. I wondered just for a heartbeat which half I'd married. I turned away from him, focusing on the receipt. Ref ST19. The digits felt deliberate. Everything about him was deliberate lately. I pulled out a pen and wrote a single question in the margin. Why lie? I went to the kitchen for water, trying to quiet the unease, and found the phone no longer on the counter where I'd left it earlier. The cracked phone was gone. I scanned the room, then noticed the faint outline of it inside the back of the desk drawer, half hidden under a stack of envelopes. He wasn't careless. He was hiding it. I remembered how he'd tucked it away earlier, pretending not to care, pretending not to notice me noticing him. Later that week, Daniel claimed he'd spent the previous Thursday afternoon at a client lunch. I nodded along, pretending to believe him, allowing him to feel safe in the comfort of my silence. But when I checked the timestamp on the receipt again, 3:42 p.m., the math didn't lie. He did. I began watching him more carefully after that. His reactions, his inconsistencies, the way his phone stayed face down no matter where he placed it, the way he angled himself away from direct light whenever he checked messages as if reflections might betray the truth he refused to say aloud. The cracked screen became a metaphor I couldn't ignore. A broken surface that still functioned, still lit up, still concealed everything beneath it. Yet every fracture reveals something sooner or later. One evening, while he pretended to nap on the couch, I saw him slide the cracked phone into the back drawer again, pushing it under a stack of documents he'd earlier claimed were just receipts for taxes. I knew better. The drawer stuck slightly when he pushed it closed, leaving a narrow gap. He didn't notice, but I did. Numbers, timelines, gaps. They all whispered the same message the truth was hiding, and Daniel was helping it stay hidden. The final moment that sealed my suspicion happened at the end of that week. He walked into the kitchen holding his cracked phone, running his finger across the damaged corner with a strange tenderness, like he was touching something delicate and dangerous at the same time. I asked if the screen bothered him. He shrugged, saying he'd get it fixed eventually, but the way he said eventually felt like the word meant never. He set the phone down quickly when another notification flashed. He shielded the screen with his hand, but not fast enough. I caught another glimpse of Trade Monisec, the same service that had appeared days before. He froze when he realized I saw it. Just for a moment. barely noticeable, but enough. Enough to tell me the numbers weren't wrong. He was, and the cracks both on the screen and in our life were no longer small enough to ignore. The restaurant bar was louder than usual that night, a restless mix of clinking glasses, half-laughed conversations, and dim music that pulsed beneath everything like a quiet warning. I arrived just a few minutes after Daniel, following the text he sent telling me to meet him for a quick drink. Words that felt too casual for the tension that had been clinging to us like damp air. The moment I stepped inside, I spotted him at a high table near the back, where the shelves of liquor bottles rose behind him like stained glass windows, for the modern age, each one catching and bending the warm light into thin, sharp reflections. The glass ashtray on the table sat unused, pristine, its smooth surface reflecting the amber light like a tiny, polished mirror. I walked toward him slowly, observing his posture, the way he leaned in slightly when talking to Marissa, the young coworker who happened to be with him tonight. Her eyes widened the moment she saw me approaching, and she straightened her back as if bracing for something she didn't want to be part of. Daniel turned at the last second, plastering on the polite smile that used to comfort me, but now made something in my chest tighten. "Claire," he said with a brightness that didn't match his eyes. "You made it." I took the seat opposite him, noting how he pulled his phone closer, angling it away from me with a reflex so subtle most people wouldn't notice. But I did. Marissa greeted me with a small, hesitant smile, brushing a stray curl behind her ear. She seemed nervous, glancing between us as though she suspected something was wrong, but didn't know whether acknowledging it might make things worse. I offered her a polite nod, then focused on Daniel's face, searching for signs of sincerity. He began describing some office event coming next month, speaking quickly and vaguely, using filler words he never used before. His voice held a defensive undertone, the kind that seemed crafted to keep me from asking real questions. I noticed how often his eyes darted toward the ashtray, not because he needed it, but because the reflective surface revealed the angle of my gaze. It was a small thing, but it told me he was monitoring not just what I saw, but how I saw it. He excused himself briefly to take a call, leaving his phone face down on the table. The moment he walked away, Marissa leaned closer, her fingers trembling slightly as she reached for her purse. "Claire," she whispered, her voice strained with conflict. "I don't know if this is my place, but I think you should see this." She unlocked her phone and pulled up a screenshot saved in her photos. For a moment, all I saw were blurred colors from the restaurant lights reflecting off the screen, but then the image sharpened Daniel's phone screen, captured mid-glance from earlier that afternoon. Message draft number 44. The preview showed part of the text. "We'll finalize everything soon. She won't." The rest cut off. The timestamp matched a time he'd claimed to be in a meeting, the same meeting he insisted ran long and prevented him from answering my call. I stared at the screenshot, my pulse tightening. In that instant, the air around us shifted. Marissa's expression was a blend of guilt and concern. "I didn't mean to pry," she said quickly, but he left his screen open for a second and the draft popped up. "I don't know who he was talking to. I thought you might need to know." Before I could respond, Daniel returned, sliding into his seat with a smile that turned brittle the moment he saw Marissa lower her phone. His eyes narrowed by a fraction of an inch. "Everything okay here?" he asked, forcing a laugh that lacked any warmth. "We were just talking," Marissa said softly. Daniel turned to me, his tone shifting from polite to sharp. "What's with the look, Claire?" I didn't answer immediately. I watched him watch me, noting how his chest rose a little too fast, how his fingers curled around his glass with a grip that telegraphed tension. "You said you were in a meeting?" "At that time," I replied finally, keeping my voice even. "I was—" He shot back quickly. "You know how these things go." Marissa's eyes widened again. Daniel caught the direction of her gaze, and suddenly his tone sharpened further. "What did you show her?" he demanded, his voice carrying across the bar. Heads turned. People quieted. The shift in attention made him snap into performance mode, plastering on a half-laugh that didn't mask the edge beneath it. "Let me guess," he said loudly, "another misunderstanding, another moment where I'm apparently the villain in your little stories?" Marissa looked mortified, shaking her head and whispering, I didn't mean..." But Daniel cut her off. "Don't get involved," he snapped, lowering his voice just enough to sound threatening. "This is between us." That was the spark that turned the moment into a public scene. Several patrons turned fully toward our table. The bartender paused mid-clean. Conversations faltered. Daniel's volume rose again, not quite shouting, but close, the kind of raised voice meant to control the narrative by making the other person seem irrational. "Claire, this is ridiculous," he said. "You're embarrassing yourself." Over what a screenshot taken without context. He grabbed his phone from the table, the movement so swift he knocked the glass ashtray slightly off-center. Its reflection caught the overhead light and sent a fractured beam across Daniel's face, illuminating a hardness I hadn't seen in him before. It meant nothing. He insisted. "Stop making scenes." The irony. He was the scene. Marissa tried again to speak, her voice caught somewhere between apology and fear. "Daniel, she just asked, stay out of it!" He snapped loud enough for the nearest tables to hear. More eyes turned. A few people exchanged glances. A couple at the bar leaned closer to listen. The pressure built, squeezing the air from my lungs, but something else rose in its place. Clarity. Cold, sharp, undeniable clarity. I looked at Daniel and saw him not the husband I thought I knew, not the man I once trusted more than anyone, but the version of him that wealth had polished and sharpened into something unrecognizable. "You deleted something just now," I said quietly. "When you came back." The corners of his eyes twitched. "No," he lied instantly. "You're being paranoid," but his fingers curled tightly around his phone knuckles, whitening. The ashtray caught the light again, reflecting the motion, his thumb moving quickly over the screen, deleting something he didn't want me to see. Marissa finally mustered the courage to speak. "I saw the draft," she said softly. "She's not imagining things." Daniel's face went still, the way water freezes suddenly when the temperature drops too fast. He turned to her with a cold, razor-edged expression that made her shrink back. "I said he whispered, stay out of it." The bar had grown almost silent. Patrons pretended not to stare while staring openly. I pushed my chair back slowly, letting the scrape of the legs cut through the tension. "If there's nothing to hide," I said, "then show me the draft." His jaw tightened. "No." "Why not?" "Because," he snapped, "I don't owe you proof every time you get some idea in your head." "It wasn't an idea," I replied. "It was a draft. And now, it's gone." The silence between us stretched thin, trembling like glass about to crack. His face twisted into something venomous, something too raw to hide. And for one fleeting second, I saw what he was truly afraid of. Not the argument, not the screenshot, not even the truth, but the possibility that I might already know too much. He stood abruptly, knocking the ashtray fully onto its side, its reflective surface rolling just enough to distort the view of his legs as he stormed past me. The last thing he said before walking out loud enough for half the restaurant to hear was a brittle, ugly sentence meant to bury me under humiliation. If you're so desperate for drama, Claire, do it, without dragging me into it. Then he left, leaving the ashtray spinning slowly on its edge, and leaving me staring at the reflection inside it, his distorted image shrinking with every rotation until it vanished completely. The silver key lay on the small ceramic dish near our entryway, catching a faint edge of lamplight as if it wanted to be noticed in a way it never had before. I'd walked past it 1,000 times without thought, but that night the scratches along its shaft, thin, fresh, deliberate, made something in my mind sharpen. Daniel insisted he hadn't used the storage unit key for months. Yet there it was, bearing new marks that contradicted the ease in his voice. I picked it up carefully, feeling the cool metal press into my palm, grounding me as I inhaled the stale quiet of our apartment. After the public scene at the restaurant, he'd barely spoken during the drive home, muttering something about being tired of pointless drama. When we stepped inside, he retreated to the bathroom, shutting the door with a firmness that felt like a warning. I stood in the living room staring at the silver key, feeling its weight grow heavier with each second I held it. It wasn't just a key, it was a question. One he didn't want me to ask. I placed it back down gently and moved toward the office, deciding on instinct to look through the shared folders on the home computer. The screen flickered to life, illuminating the room in a pale blue glow that made the shadows stretch long and thin across the floor. I pulled up the browser history first, then the communication logs, the digital breadcrumbs we often leave behind when we're not as careful as we think. The timeline appeared neat at first: email drafts, calendar reminders, online orders, but then I saw a gap. 1 minute missing from the sequence. 03, 17, 03, 18. That 60-second void pulsed louder than any notification. People don't just disappear from digital records, not unless they want to. I clicked through again, double-checking. The gap was still there, a perfect, precise hole in an otherwise seamless pattern. This was evidence number 3, though I didn't label it that yet. I told myself maybe it was a glitch, maybe a system update, but the part of me that tracked numbers instinctively knew better. Numbers don't lie. Only people do. I leaned back in the chair, listening to the faint hum of the computer fan as I replayed Daniel's explanation from earlier that week, how he'd claimed to be out with a client during that exact time frame. His tone then had carried a certain confidence, the kind that came from assuming I wouldn't check. But I just had, and the truth was sitting in front of me, clear and cold. I heard footsteps behind me. Daniel's reflection appeared in the darkened window before he entered the room, his shoulders squared, his posture defensive. "What are you doing?" he asked, voice soft but strained like a taut rope, moments from snapping. I clicked the window closed calmly. "Budget review." I lied. "I'm behind this month." His eyes scanned the desk, quickly lingering on the receipts I'd collected earlier. "You're always behind lately," he said, a comment meant to sting, though the only emotion it stirred was confirmation. Confirmation that he was trying to deflect, distract, derail. I stood and walked past him, letting my shoulder brush his, just enough to assert that I wasn't shrinking from him. "You came home late again?" I said without turning. "Client meeting. Yes, he answered too quickly. Same as always. You said that last time, I replied, finally facing him. But the details you gave me didn't match the day before. His jaw twitched. Are you keeping score now? Just trying to understand, I said. The more you explain, the less things make sense. His eyes hardened. Maybe you're just not listening. The dismissal didn't hurt this time. It clarified. He didn't want me to listen because listening led to noticing, and noticing led to questioning, and questioning led to truth. He turned away abruptly, walking toward the kitchen as though the conversation bored him. I followed a moment later, watching as he poured himself a drink with too much force, the ice clinking violently inside the glass. You're upset about that stupid screenshot, he said. Marissa shouldn't have shown you anything. Why, I asked. Because it exposes you. His hand froze midair. Watch your tone, he muttered. You're twisting things. I'm not twisting anything, I said softly. You're hiding things. He slammed the glass onto the counter, a small splash escaping over the edge. I'm done talking about this, he said. He walked away, dismissing me entirely, leaving the air thick with resentment and fear, though the fear didn't belong to me this time. After he disappeared into the bedroom, I returned to the office, the silver key glinting faintly in the corner of my vision. I picked it up again, turning it over slowly, imagining the lock it belonged to, imagining the door it opened, imagining what he kept inside. I searched the desk drawers for clues, bills, envelopes, scattered notes. One folded sheet stuck out from the trash bin beside the desk, the edge slightly smudged with ink. I pulled it out carefully. It was a printed note typed and half erased. The words remaining were fragmented, floating without context. Transfer meeting instructions discussed terms. It wasn't enough to decode fully, but it was enough to confirm the growing shape of betrayal. I folded it and placed it in my notebook. Later that night, Daniel approached me with forced gentleness, apologizing for being short and blaming stress from work. He touched my arm lightly, but his hand felt foreign, like it belonged to someone trained to mimic affection rather than feel it. I asked again where he'd been earlier in the week. He answered, but this time his story differed slightly from the previous version. A different cafe, a different client name, a different hour. The missing minute screamed louder than his words. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. And that was when he said something small but telling. You're imagining patterns that aren't there. The irony. Patterns were the one thing I never imagined. Patterns were what I lived by. When he went to shower, I checked the office one last time. The silver key sat on the dish exactly where I'd returned it. But now the scratches looked deeper, somehow darker, as though the metal itself remembered the door it opened, even if Daniel refused to admit it existed. I stood there staring at it, at the missing minute, at the fractured explanations, at the angles of his lies. And in that still breathless moment, I made a quiet promise to myself I would stop waiting for the truth to appear on its own. I would find it. Even if I had to unlock every hidden place he thought I'd never look. The half-open drawer was the first thing I noticed when I walked into the bedroom that evening, a sliver of darkness cutting through the quiet, like a secret that couldn't stay sealed, the wooden edge pulled out just enough to betray a hurried hand. Daniel never left drawers open. He closed things with the precision of a man who feared the appearance of disorder. But tonight, that inch of exposed space felt intentional, or at least revealing, as though the room itself was tired of covering for him. I stepped closer, the floorboards creaking softly beneath my feet, and saw the faint indentation where something had been removed recently, a rectangular shape still pressed into the velvet lining. The emptiness spoke louder than any object could have. The light from the hallway window spilled across the carpet, in a thin blade-like line slicing through the dust motes that hovered in the air. As I leaned in, the reflection from the glass frame on the wall fractured the moment into two angles, and without planning it, the motif echo slipped into my thoughts with unsettling clarity. Light splits across the glass, exposing his shifting story. The words felt truer now than when they first formed, a quiet prophecy unfolding in slow motion. Inside the drawer lay a stack of neatly folded papers, financial documents, communication logs, invoices, and tucked between them a small envelope where Daniel had hastily pressed his thumb, leaving a slight smudge, as if trying to cover something rather than reveal it. I reached in my fingers, brushing over the cool edges of the papers, and pulled them out slowly, scanning for context. Before I could make sense of them, I heard the front door shut. His footsteps followed measured, heavy tense. I straightened just as he entered the bedroom doorway, his shadow stretching long across the floor before his body appeared. He halted when he saw me standing over the drawer. "What are you doing?" he asked, his voice too soft, too careful, like a man trying to hide the tremor beneath the surface. I turned toward him, watching the way his eyes moved not toward me, but toward the mirror mounted beside the dresser. His gaze flicked there first. Just a flash, but enough to register panic, as though he needed to see how guilt looked on his own face before he responded. Then he forced himself to look at me. That stolen glance was evidence number 4, a behavioral contradiction wrapped in his reflection, a tell so precise it might as well have been time-stamped and documented. His hand trembled as he stepped farther into the room, another tiny signal he tried to smooth away by running his fingers through his hair. "Why's this open?" I asked, tapping the drawer lightly. "I wasn't in there," he said too quickly. "You must have left it open." "I didn't," I replied. "I haven't touched this drawer in weeks." He hesitated just long enough to confirm he was constructing a lie rather than recalling a truth. Maybe it got stuck, he tried. But the drawer glided silently when I pushed it back and pulled it open again. Smooth. Perfect. Epic. Not stuck. The lie hung between us, thin as a thread but sharp enough to cut. He stepped closer, trying to assert control through proximity, but I didn't move. The tension in the room thickened. The light sliced across his face again, refracting in the mirror, bending the angle of his expression so that fear and anger blurred together into something unfamiliar. "These are just work files," he said, nodding toward the papers in my hand. "Confidential stuff. You shouldn't be digging around." "Then why were they in this drawer?" I asked. "You never keep work documents here." "I reorganized." He snapped, agitation leaking through. "Since when?" He didn't answer. His jaw worked in a tight rhythm, irritation pulsing along the muscles near his temples. When he reached for the papers, I stepped back, holding them away from him. His eyes flashed with something raw fear, maybe, or the anticipation of being caught. The sun outside dipped behind the buildings, and the room darkened in pieces, leaving us in a strange half-light where everything looked softer except the truth. The reflection in the mirror caught his arm as he reached forward, and for a moment the angle distorted his hand, so it appeared doubled, one version reaching for the papers, the other reaching for a lie he could no longer contain. I realized then that he didn't fear me uncovering the drawer. He feared me seeing how he reacted when confronted with its contents. "What are you hiding?" I asked, lowering my voice. "Nothing," he insisted too quickly again. "You're imagining things." "Imagining things." The phrase tasted bitter. It was the same line he used when explaining disappearing timestamps, broken timelines, misplaced receipts. A script he memorized to make me doubt my own clarity. He moved suddenly, grabbing the papers from my hand, stuffing them back into the drawer with shaking fingers. He pushed the drawer shut so hard it rattled. "Stop invading my privacy," he said. "This isn't a game." "Then stop lying," I answered. The words hit him harder than I expected. His shoulders tensed. His eyes flicked to the mirror again, searching, always searching. And in that fleeting reflection, the guilt surfaced, fully exposing itself, the way fractured light reveals dust suspended in air. He glanced down, exhaling through his nose like a man cornered. "You don't know what you're talking about," he said quietly, but the tremor in his hand betrayed him. Evidence number 4 wasn't on paper. It was alive in his body. The drawer, the reflection, the panic, the contradictions. He moved closer, too close, his shadow merging with mine on the floor, but I didn't step away. He lowered his voice. "You need to stop digging. You're making things worse." Worse for whom I didn't ask. The answer was already unfolding around us in the dimming room. He left abruptly, then muttering something about taking a walk. The sound of his footsteps echoing down the hallway with a rigidity that suggested escape rather than clarity. When the door closed behind him, I returned to the drawer. It opened easily, too easily. Inside, beneath the papers he shoved in carelessly, I found the indentation again, the shape of something rectangular, the outline unmistakable. His cracked phone had been there recently before being removed. He'd moved it again, hidden it again, protected it again. And every time he tried to bury his lies, they surfaced in reflections and tremors in the silence between his excuses. I stood there for a long moment, letting the stillness settle, letting the truth take its rightful shape. Light from the hallway cut into the drawer once more, refracting through the partially open space, dividing the shadows into blade-like lines that matched the pattern of his unraveling story. And in that fragmented glow, I understood something simple, something inevitable. The truth wasn't hiding from me. It was racing toward me, splintering through every crack he tried to cover, waiting for the moment when reflection and reality would finally collide. The paper sliced my finger before I even realized how tightly I was gripping the stack of statements, a thin sting blooming across my skin as a single drop of blood welled up bright against the pale margin. It startled me, not the pain, but the timing. It felt symbolic, like the truth demanding a price for being touched. I pressed my thumb to the cut, holding my breath as I stared at the jagged edge of the page, wondering how many more small wounds I would collect before Daniel's lies stopped multiplying. The documents in my hand weren't enough, not yet. They hinted, they suggested, they whispered, but they didn't shout. And shouting was what I needed now. Evidence, real evidence stamped with certainty. That's why I arranged the meeting with Victor Reyes, the internal financial consultant Daniel had mentioned weeks ago in passing. I framed the request harmlessly, telling Daniel I needed help understanding our investment structure better. He didn't suspect anything then. Maybe he thought I was still the version of myself who stayed quiet, who took explanations at face value, who didn't see the cracks forming underneath the shine of his new wealth. But that Claire was long gone. The moment Victor stepped into the small cafe where we'd agreed to meet, I felt something shift. He had the look of a man who had seen numbers used both honestly and violently thin-rimmed glasses, a calm gaze posture held with the stiffness of someone who valued precision more than comfort. When he shook my hand, his grip was firm grounded, and his eyes flicked briefly to the bandage around my finger. "Paper cut," he asked. "From what?" "From trying to understand," I replied. He nodded once as if that answer made more sense than any other. We sat at a corner table where the afternoon light slanted across the wood in long, warm strips. Victor placed a small leather notebook beside his coffee, open to a blank page but ready for annotation. I inhaled slowly, steadying myself. "I have questions about my husband's accounts," I began. "And his timelines." Victor didn't interrupt. He simply waited, pen-poised expression, unreadable. So I gave him the facts one by one, like I would present a case at work: the misaligned receipt, the missing minute, the behavioral contradiction when he saw his reflection, the screenshot Marissa had shown me, the drawer left open, the documents hurriedly shoved inside. Victor wrote a few concise notes, no unnecessary details, no visible reaction. But when I mentioned Trade Monisec, the financial service from Daniel's cracked phone, Victor paused mid-stroke. His eyes lifted, narrowing slightly. "That's not a standard consumer platform," he said quietly. "It's used for liquidity transfers, usually to accounts intended to stay off primary records." My stomach tightened. Hidden accounts. Potentially. Or short-term pass-throughs. Neither is common for someone without complex investments. "He doesn't have complex investments," I said. "At least not that I know of." Victor's pen tapped once against the page, a small, thoughtful sound. "Do you have timestamps?" "Yes." I handed him the copy I made of the receipt and the notes from the missing minute. He analyzed both, tracing each detail with his eyes. Then he reached into his briefcase and withdrew a small tablet. "I'm going to run a timeline check," he said. "It won't be conclusive, but it will show whether the narrative he gave you is technically possible." While the system loaded, he looked at me again. "Has he shown signs of financial distancing?" "Yes," I said. "And emotional distancing." Victor accepted that without judgment. A few moments later, the tablet chimed. "His timeline is inconsistent," he said slowly. "Your receipt and the browser gap contradict his stated movements." I exhaled the air, leaving my lungs in a cold stream. Meaning, he said gently. "He's preparing something. Possibly a separation. Possibly a shift of assets. Without telling me." "Yes." His voice didn't waver. He wasn't guessing. He was stating a fact. My chest tightened. For a second, the reality felt larger than the room too big to hold inside my ribs. But clarity, sharp, cold clarity, settled quickly afterward. "There's more," I said, pulling out the folded witness statement Marissa had emailed that morning. "Evidence number 5. Witness ID, M. Hale. Observed at 5:42 p.m. Victor read it silently, then let out a slow breath. "This is significant," he said. "A witness with a timestamp. Combined with the other inconsistencies, it strengthens your position." "My position." "Not our position, mine." It was the first time someone acknowledged that Daniel and I no longer stood on the same side of anything. Victor closed his notebook. I need to be frank with you, Claire, he said. Your husband is showing the markers of someone moving assets in preparation for a personal transition. Usually when someone uses secondary devices, hidden accounts, and timeline manipulation, the next steps involve financial severance. He wants to cut me out, I whispered. He's preparing for something, Victor corrected. And you need to prepare too. Something cold crept along my spine. Not fear exactly, more like a settling awareness. A truth taking shape. What should I do? I asked. Document everything he said immediately, every inconsistency, every timestamp, every contradiction. Build a sequence. I started one already. Good. And stop letting him see you hesitate. Hesitation invites aggression. The way he said it made my pulse flicker. You're not just talking about finances, are you? Victor met my eyes fully then, and his voice lowered. People who hide money often hide other things. Be careful. We ended the meeting with an exchange of contact information and a quiet promise from him to send me a preliminary financial review. As I stood to leave, he added one more thing. The cut on your finger, he said, nodding at the bandage. Paper wounds sometimes reveal more truth than spoken words. It struck me as strange, but it stayed with me long after I walked out. When I got home, Daniel was sitting on the couch, his posture stiff, his eyes shadowed by something that looked like suspicion. Where were you? He asked. Running errands, I replied calmly. Long errands. I had things to do. What kind of things? His voice tightened, the question hooked with accusation. Why do you care all of a sudden where I go? Since when do you track my movements? I don't track anything I said. But I notice patterns. That sentence landed harder than I expected. His jaw clenched. His breathing quickened. His fingers curled around the armrest, knuckles whitening. Stop digging, he said. You're creating problems that don't exist. Then why are you afraid of questions? His eyes flicked away toward the bedroom mirror again. Always the mirror. As if the reflection threatened to speak the truth he fought to bury, the tension in his face darkened. Drop it, he warned, or what? He didn't answer. Silence swelled between us until he stood abruptly and left the room, the door to the bedroom closing hard behind him. Minutes later, my phone chimed. A message from Victor. The preliminary report. 3 words glowed at the top of the document. Timeline claims false. I stared at the screen as the reality crystallized fully inside me. Daniel wasn't slipping away by accident. He was directing the exit, planning it, constructing it. And while he built his escape, he expected me to stay blind. But I wasn't blind anymore, and the next fracture in his story, the one that would break everything open, was already on its way. The dim lamp on our nightstand flickered with a weak amber glow that struggled to fill the room, casting long shadows across the walls like figures waiting for their turn to speak. I sat at the edge of the bed with the stack of documents Victor had sent, my fingers trembling slightly as I spread the pages out in a fan across the comforter. The dimness made everything look old or worn, as though the truth had been hiding in those papers for years, waiting for the light to finally find it. Evidence number 6 lay at the center of the pile like a pulse, an official bank slip tied to ACTCA XR02 listing a large withdrawal made just 2 days earlier. The transaction wasn't linked to any joint account. It wasn't linked to any investment account I recognized. It wasn't linked to anything I was meant to know about. The numbers were precise, deliberate, sterile, as if someone had washed them clean of emotion. But they cut deeper than any argument Daniel and I had ever had. I traced the digits with my thumb, my breath catching when I saw the amount again. Enough money to start over. Enough money to leave someone behind. Enough money to erase a marriage. The dim lamp hummed faintly, its light stretching across the paper like an accusation making the ink shimmer. I stared at the column of numbers and felt something inside me rearrange, not break, but settle a line harden. Everything Daniel had been doing suddenly fit together, every missing minute, every fractured explanation, every glance toward a reflection instead of toward me. He wasn't confused or stressed or overwhelmed. He was preparing. And he was trying to move the board pieces fast enough that I wouldn't see the strategy until he'd already won. A quiet click sounded from the hallway. Keys. The front door opened. Footsteps. Unsteady. Irregular. He was home early. I shoved the papers back into a folder and placed it beneath the comforter just as Daniel stepped into the doorway, his silhouette dim and distorted, the hallway light haloing his frame like a false innocence. "You're awake," he said, though his tone held no surprise. He scanned the room quickly. His eyes moved like a man expecting something to be out of place. I tried to keep my face neutral. "I couldn't sleep," I said. He walked farther inside, loosening his tie with a sharp tug. "Long night," he muttered. Meetings ran late. He didn't look at me when he said it. He didn't look at the lamp either, even though the dimness made the room feel like a confession waiting to be spoken. He sat on the edge of the bed just inches from the documents hidden beneath my thigh. My heartbeat thrummed in my ears. He leaned forward, rubbing his forehead with both hands. For a moment, he looked human, vulnerable. But then he straightened, his eyes sharpening with calculation. "You said you were running errands earlier," he began. "You were gone longer than usual." It wasn't a question. It was a probe. A test. "I had things to take care of," I replied. "What kind of things?" His voice dipped into something darker. He was fishing, not for information, for inconsistencies. He was the one searching for evidence now. "Things that don't concern you," I said calmly. The shift in his expression was instant, like a muscle spasm. He wasn't used to me withholding anything. For years, he treated my transparency as a given, a resource that would never run dry. But the new Claire, the one who finally recognized patterns, was no longer easy to read. He stood abruptly and paced the room, his agitation swirling like dust around the dim lamp's dying glow. "You've been acting strange," he said. "Checking things. Asking questions. Maybe because things don't make sense," I replied, my voice steady. "Maybe because timelines don't match." His movement froze. He turned slowly. "What timelines?" "The ones you keep changing." For a moment, he didn't speak. His eyes darted toward the mirror across the room, the same mirror he always checked when he thought I wasn't looking. Something tightened along his jaw. "Are you accusing me of lying? I'm asking you to explain." "There's nothing to explain." His voice pitched upward, cracking at the edge. He stepped closer until his shadow swallowed the thin circle of light from the dim lamp. "I'm tired of you inventing problems. I'm tired of you pretending there aren't any." That did it. Something in him snapped. His control stuttered like a bad signal. "You don't trust me," he said. "Not anymore. Should I?" His face darkened. You're overreacting to what I asked quietly. Transactions you hid, receipts you concealed, meetings that didn't exist. His breath hitched barely but enough for me to see the crack form. He moved toward the nightstand, opening the top drawer. His cracked phone wasn't there this time. He slammed the drawer shut. I'm done with this conversation. Then answer one question I said. Who is Akait? XR02. 4. He froze mid-step. His shoulders locked. The silence that followed was thick enough to feel. When he turned around, his expression was something new, something between rage and fear, like a man realizing the trap he built for someone else had begun to close around him instead. Where did you hear that? He whispered. It doesn't matter. It matters, he said, stepping toward me. You shouldn't know about that account. Why not? Because he snapped. It's private. Private, like your second phone. Private, like your disappearing minutes. Private, like the messages you wrote but never sent. The accusation broke across his face like a slap. He exhaled, long, slow, controlled. You're out of line, and you're out of excuses. He stormed toward the doorway, muttering curses under his breath. But instead of leaving, he turned sharply, pointing a finger at me. Don't go looking where you don't belong. You mean the finances I helped build, the marriage I've held together. He didn't answer. He stormed out, slamming the door hard enough to shake dust from the lampshade. I waited until his footsteps faded down the hallway before pulling the folder out from beneath the comforter. I opened it again, staring at the bank slip, the numbers crisp under the dim light. I traced the account code with my finger, whispering it aloud, committing it to memory. Then my phone vibrated. A message from Victor. One sentence. The withdrawal suggests a planned severance. My stomach knotted. The lamp flickered once, twice, struggling against the dark. I looked toward the bedroom door, the echo of Daniel's rage still trembling in the frame. The truth wasn't distant anymore. It was here, breathing down my neck. And as I stared at the dim lamp's dying glow, I understood with chilling certainty I wasn't fighting to save a marriage anymore. I was preparing for a war Daniel had already begun. The torn envelope wasn't supposed to mean anything, just another piece of discarded paper in the trash bin near Daniel's office desk, but the jagged rip along its top edge caught my eye the moment I stepped inside the room. It looked like it had been opened in a hurry, not with the neat precision Daniel normally used, but with the frantic pull of someone trying to hide what mattered before anyone else could see it. I crouched down and pulled it free, my fingers brushing against faint traces of ink smudged across the torn surface. Something inside the envelope shifted with a soft crackle, fragments of printed emails. I reached in carefully, collecting each torn piece and arranging them across the desk like a puzzle desperate to be solved. The room was silent except for the faint hum of the desk lamp. The quiet kind of silence that made every heartbeat feel like a ticking clock. When I picked up the largest fragment, my breath stilled. Email. Ref X12 Evidence Number 7. The header stamped cleanly at the top matched the reference Victor told me to watch for. Any communication bearing that label meant Daniel had been coordinating something behind closed doors. I scanned the clipped lines: discrepancy, timeline, follow-up, ensure discretion. They weren't full sentences, not yet, but they held enough shape to reveal intention concealment, manipulation, planning. And then, on a smaller piece near the corner, I saw the timestamp. The exact timestamp Daniel claimed he was with me. He had looked me in the eye that night and told me he'd never left the apartment. But the email fragment said otherwise. I felt a cold thread weaving through my ribs, tightening with every breath. Daniel had been building an alibi, layering lies with the confidence of someone who believed he would never be questioned, never be challenged, never be caught. Not by me. Not by the woman he thought he'd trained to overlook inconsistencies. I gathered the pieces and slid them into a folder, placing the torn envelope on top. I needed context. I needed the rest of the email. I needed a confrontation, but not yet. Timing mattered now. I spent years balancing spreadsheets, studying patterns, finding errors others overlooked. That skill had become my armor, and tonight it was my weapon. I moved toward the computer and opened the shared drive, combing through old files, archived folders, anything that might hold the missing fragments. Daniel was predictable in his arrogance. He never deleted the source files if he thought hiding evidence physically was enough. But the shared drive was clean. Too clean. Suspiciously clean. I checked the trash folder on the desktop. Empty. Recently emptied. Manually purged. While I sat at the desk analyzing the gaps, the unmistakable sound of the front door opening cut through the silence. He was home? I clicked the window closed just as Daniel stepped into the room, his expression hardening instantly at the sight of me sitting in his office chair. "What are you doing?" he asked, his voice low controlled and edged with tension. "Looking for the printer cable," I said smoothly. "It wasn't in the drawer, no." His eyes flicked to the desk surface, scanning for signs of what I'd touched. When he saw the torn envelope beside the monitor, his jaw tightened. "Why is that out?" "It was on the floor." I lied. "I didn't want the papers spilling everywhere. There were no papers inside," he said sharply. "It was trash. A misstep. He shouldn't have known what was inside if it was trash." I tilted my head slightly. "Interesting. You seem very sure." His inhale was sharp. "Because I remember throwing it away." "With printed emails inside?" He froze. For a moment, I thought he might actually lash out, not physically, but verbally the way he did when cornered. But he forced himself to relax, shoulders dropping as he attempted a dismissive laugh. "Claire, you're making everything into something it's not," he said. "You tear open mail all the time. Maybe you ripped it and forgot." "Emails aren't mail," I replied evenly. His eyes flashed with something raw. "You're twisting things again." He stepped around me, leaning over the desk as if he needed to reassert dominance over the space. "You're becoming paranoid." "Am I asked. "Or are you afraid I'm finally paying attention?" That struck deeper than I expected. His eyelids twitched, just a small tremor, but enough. He straightened abruptly, turning away as though the angle of his body could control the direction of the truth. But the truth was already circling him, hungry and precise. "This is ridiculous," he muttered. "You're inventing problems. Stop going through my things." "Then stop lying," I said softly. It was almost a whisper, but it landed like a blow. His shoulders stiffened. He turned toward me slowly, a cold smile forming the kind he used to diffuse tension without ever addressing the cause of it. "I'm not lying," he said. "You're imagining patterns that don't exist. Patterns don't lie," I said. "People do." He took a step closer. "You're digging for things that aren't there, Claire, and you're hurting us." "There is no us in your timelines," I replied. "You left me out every time you made a move." His face hardened. "You don't understand. Explain it to me. I don't owe you that. You owe me the truth." He breathed out through his nose, slow and angry. "You're pushing me. he said. Further than you should. Is that a threat? It's a warning. Warnings mean guilt. His eyes flickered. And there it was. The crack. The one he couldn't deny, couldn't hide, couldn't contort into something else. I stepped backward slowly, not out of fear but calculation. The emotional distance between us had finally become physical, and he felt it too. He watched me with a tension that bordered on panic, the look of a man who realized the silent war he'd been waging had just become mutual. I kept my voice steady. I'll be out for a while, I said. Don't wait up. His brows lifted sharply. Where are you going to get answers? I said. Real ones. He moved as if to block the doorway, but I sidestepped him. It was the first time I'd seen him hesitate, unsure whether to restrain himself or escalate. He chose neither. He let me pass, but not without one last attempt to salvage control. You're making a mistake, he said through clenched teeth. No, I replied. I'm correcting one. I left the apartment with the torn envelope in my bag and the fragments of email EX12 pressed flat between the pages of my notebook. The night air felt colder than usual, sharper, as though the world itself sensed the shift brewing beneath the surface. I walked without a destination, letting the city lights flicker across my thoughts like scattered pieces of evidence waiting to be assembled. Daniel's lies had been tidy, but his mistakes were beginning to pile up. Evidence number 7 was the piece that forced the board to change the piece that cornered him, the piece that told me the next move was mine. And I wasn't going to play gently anymore. The audio recorder sat on the coffee table like an unblinking witness, its small red light hidden beneath a coaster so that Daniel wouldn't notice it unless he was looking for danger. And danger was always the one thing he never expected from me. Evelyn Cho stood by the window holding a mug of tea, pretending to admire the view, as though she hadn't been invited here for a very specific reason. Her calm posture, her soft smile, her gentle nods, all of it made her look like a neighbor casually dropping by, but under that quiet exterior was a woman who'd lived long enough to recognize when something was wrong in a marriage. Long enough to understand that silence could be a scalpel when held correctly. I sat on the couch, smoothing my palms over my jeans to ground myself the folder of evidence tucked beneath a cushion beside me. The apartment felt different today, sharper, more alert, as though the walls sensed what was coming. Light from the late afternoon sun poured in through the blinds in long, angled stripes, illuminating dust particles drifting through the air like suspended seconds. Daniel didn't knock when he entered. He never knocked anymore. He stepped inside with the heavy, irritated footsteps of a man already bracing for conflict. When he saw Evelyn, his posture changed instantly, a flicker of forced warmth, replacing the simmering hostility he'd worn all week. "Oh," he said with a strained smile. "Didn't know we had company." "I was just dropping something off," Evelyn replied cheerfully. "Claire said I could stay a moment." Her tone was light, but her eyes subtle. Observant watched him the way a cat watches a crack, beneath a door, aware something could slip through at any second. Daniel loosened his tie and walked toward the couch, glancing at me with suspicion disguised as politeness. "Everything okay?" he asked, that artificial softness coating every syllable. "I wasn't expecting this." "We're fine," I said, my voice steady, controlled. "Just talking." He lowered himself into the armchair across from me, resting his elbows on his knees, body leaning forward in a stance meant to dominate the space. He always leaned forward when he felt things slipping from his grip, talking about what he asked. The neighborhood. Life, I said. Change. He froze at that word. Change. The one thing he could inflict freely but never accept being confronted with. And decisions, I added. The flicker in his eyes told me he heard the unspoken meaning. Evelyn sipped her tea and looked between us. Oh, marriage decisions, she said innocently. Those always take time. And honesty. Daniel's head snapped toward her. I'm very honest, he said too quickly. Really? Evelyn asked, still smiling. That's so good to hear. She didn't sound sarcastic. She didn't need to. Her calm certainty unsettled him in ways he didn't understand. I leaned back on the couch, resting one hand on the cushion above the hidden recorder. I've had some questions, I said softly, about timelines, finances, messages. Daniel inhaled sharply. Not this again. Again, Evelyn asked. So, it's been a discussion before. He shot her a look, but she returned it with the steady gentleness of someone who wasn't intimidated by men who relied on volume and posture instead of truth. Just a misunderstanding, Daniel muttered. Claire tends to read into things. Only when the numbers don't add up, I said. And they haven't been adding up for a while. His jaw tightened. We're doing this in front of a neighbor. Why not? I asked. Truth doesn't change based on who hears it. You're being dramatic, he hissed quietly, forgetting entirely that people with sharp hearing can catch a whisper across a room. Evelyn raised an eyebrow but said nothing. I opened the folder slowly, each paper rustling like a countdown. Referee ST-19, I said. The misaligned receipt. You said you were in a meeting that day. I was. The timestamp says you weren't. His throat bobbed. You're reading it wrong. The missing minute, I continued. 03-17-23. 18. Digital gaps don't happen by accident. Claire. The screenshot Marissa showed me, message draft number 44. You said it was nothing. It was he insisted. It meant nothing. But you deleted it. His face darkened. Because it was unfinished. Because it was incriminating. His eyes flickered again. That flicker, the same one I saw in the drawer, the same one reflected in the mirror, the same one that revealed everything he tried to hide. Let's not do this now, he said through clenched teeth. Not with an audience. But you've given me audiences before, I replied. At the restaurant. In the car. In the hall. His face paled. This is different. It is, I said, because this time I came prepared. I reached beneath the cushion and slid the audio recorder just enough to expose the edge, not enough for him to see the red light, but enough for him to understand what it was. His breath caught. Claire, he whispered harshly. What the hell is that a chance I said for you to tell the truth? He surged to his feet. Turn it off. It's not on. I lied smoothly. Not yet. Evelyn set her mug down softly. The tiny click landed like a judge tapping a gavel. Daniel, she said gently, maybe you should sit. I'm not. Sit. She repeated, not forcefully, but with the kind of calm that leaves no room for argument. To my shock, he obeyed. I waited a second, letting silence tighten the air around us. Who is Acti? XR02 for? I asked. His lips parted, but nothing came out. He swallowed again. It's complicated. Try me. It's personal. So was our marriage, I said. Before you stripped it down to timelines and lies, you don't understand what I'm dealing with, he insisted, voice cracking despite his efforts. Then explain it. He shook his head. I can't. Won't I? Corrected. And rights don't disappear just because you look away from them. Evelyn leaned forward. Daniel, she said, her voice almost tender. Did you move funds without telling her? He shifted in his chair, eyes darting between us. No. Did you transfer anything? No. Did you prepare an account in your name only? No. Did you plan something without telling her? No. He snapped too loud, too defensive, too fast. Evelyn sighed softly, and then with a calm precision that could have cut steel, she asked, Then why did I hear you on the phone last week telling someone you'd finalize things soon before she notices? Daniel froze. Completely froze. My heartbeat faltered. What his face drained of color. What did you just say? You were outside your door, Evelyn said. The hall carries sound. His breath hitched violently. You misunderstood. No, she said. I didn't. The silence shattered. You don't understand, he shouted. I had to move the money before. He stopped. Too late. The words were out. Evelyn's eyes widened slightly. I kept mine steady before what I asked, before what Daniel. His chest rose and fell in panicked bursts. Before you tried to take it, he blurted. Before you ruined everything. The room froze around us. My pulse slowed. Ice spread through my veins as his admission echoed in the tight walls. So you did move the money I said. To leave me with nothing? He looked at me, and for the first time he didn't even try to lie. I had to, he whispered. You weren't supposed to find out. Evelyn placed her hand over her mouth, horrified. I leaned back slowly, pressing my finger to the hidden recorders button. Click. The red light turned solid. Admission captured. Evidence number 8 re-ease 10. Timestamp 0914. Daniel saw the light and lunged forward, panic overtaking every rational thought. Turn it off! He screamed. But Evelyn was faster, stepping between us with surprising strength. Enough, she said firmly. You said it. She heard it. I heard it. And now, it's recorded. Daniel staggered backward, chest-heaving, hands trembling as though the truth itself had taken physical shape and struck him. I rose from the couch, lifting the recorder with deliberate calm. You planned to erase me, I said, but you erased yourself instead. His knees weakened. He fell into the armchair, head in his hands. Claire, please. But it was too late for please. Too late for damage control. Too late for anything but consequences. I walked toward the door, the recorder resting solid and warm in my hand, a weapon built from his own voice. This wasn't a conversation I said quietly. This was the truth catching up, and as the door closed behind me, leaving Daniel drowning in the silence he feared most, I felt the first clean breath I'd taken in months fill my lungs. The truth had finally spoken, and this time it was his voice, not mine, that would destroy him. The wristwatch reflection trembled faintly against the conference room table as I set it down beside the stack of organized evidence, the gleam from its polished face catching the overhead light in a way that made the moment feel suspended, sharpened, almost ceremonial. The attorney across from me, a woman named Lena Royce, with sharp eyes and a sharper sense of justice, folded her hands neatly and offered a small, approving nod. You did the right thing documenting everything she said. Most people come in here with emotion. You came with facts. Facts. The one thing Daniel had never been able to distort, no matter how many stories he rewrote. I looked at the audio recorder resting beside the watch, its small display screen dark now, but carrying inside it the single sentence that had finally cracked the facade he spent months constructing. I had to move the money before she tried to take it. That line, recorded with Evelyn's calm presence anchoring it, had become the cornerstone of this entire process. Lena tapped the stack of documents I'd brought: receipts, screenshots, timelines, witness statements, financial contradictions printed neatly and in chronological order. This is airtight, she said, flipping through the binder Victor helped me create. He can't dispute the timestamp discrepancies. And he certainly can't argue with his own voice. He'll try, I said softly. He's good at pretending the truth is a misunderstanding. He can try, she replied, but denial isn't a defense. Not in cases like this. She paused, studying me. You're calmer than most people would be. I exhaled slowly. I've had time to accept it. Watching someone unravel in real time, seeing their lies line up like failed equations, it changes something inside you. It strips the panic out. She nodded thoughtfully. You're stronger than you realize. I wasn't sure strength was the right word. It felt more like clarity, like I'd been walking through a dark room for months, hands pressed against walls, until the moment the audio recorder clicked and the lights finally came on. Now in the aftermath, the truth didn't burn. It illuminated. After we finalized the initial filing, Lena scheduled a follow-up meeting with a financial strategist to ensure Daniel couldn't manipulate the assets further. She walked me to the lobby with the calm steadiness of someone who had guided countless clients out of worse situations. This is the turning point, she said. It gets easier from here. I wasn't convinced easier was the right word either, but a corner had been turned and I could feel the difference in the air around me as I stepped outside. The city felt brighter. Even the cold wind brushing against my face felt like something cleansing rather than punishing. I held the wristwatch in my palm as I walked the metal warming slowly against my skin. Daniel had given it to himself as a celebration gift the day his consulting deal closed, the day his wealth shifted dramatically. I remembered how he strutted around the apartment after buying it, admiring the way the light caught the reflective surface, turning his wrist into a statement of victory. Funny how objects can betray us. Funny how reflections reveal what words try to hide. Later that evening, when I returned to the apartment to gather a few necessities, I found Daniel sitting at the dining table, shoulders slumped, eyes hollow. He looked as though someone had drained the confidence out of him drop by drop. He didn't speak when I entered, just stared at the wall, jaw tense. I set the wristwatch on the table between us. The metal clinked quietly against the wood, puncturing the silence. He looked at it as though it were a verdict instead of an accessory. You went to a lawyer, he said, finally. Voice low, rough. Yes, I replied. You left me no choice. His lips twitched, not a smile, not exactly pain, but something caught between disbelief and resentment. You were supposed to support me, he said. You were supposed to stand by me. I did. I said simply. For years. Through everything. Until you made decisions without me. Until you turned our life into a puzzle you expected me never to solve. He dragged a hand down his face. I didn't mean for it to go this far. It didn't go anywhere I said. You led it there. Silence stretched. Heavy. Uneven. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, palms pressed together. We can fix this, he said. If you just stop pushing. We can pretend none of this happened. I felt something snap inside me, not anger, not sorrow, but the last thread of illusion. Pretending is what got us here, I said. It's what you relied on, my silence, my trust, my willingness to accept the version of the truth you handed me. His eyes hardened. So that's it. You're just going to destroy everything. I'm not destroying anything, I said quietly. I'm rebuilding what you broke. With lawyers, with evidence. His gaze flicked to the wristwatch again. You're punishing me. No, I said. I'm holding you accountable. He scoffed. Accountable. You sound like one of those arrogant consultants who think paperwork is morality. Paperwork, I said, is the only thing you didn't manipulate. He flinched. Actually flinched. The truth hit him harder than any accusation. Claire, he whispered, and for a fleeting second the man I married resurfaced, the hopeful one, the ambitious one, the one who hadn't yet been swallowed by greed and secrecy. I didn't want to lose you. Then you shouldn't have tried to erase me, I said. His breath trembled. I was scared, he admitted. Scared of losing what I'd built. Scared of needing someone. But you did lose me, I said. The moment you chose deception over partnership. He shook his head slowly as if refusing to accept the reality pressing down on him. I can change, he murmured. I can fix this. You can't fix what you refuse to admit, I said, and now the truth is documented, recorded, witnessed. This isn't a fight between you and me anymore. It's bigger than that. His shoulders sagged in defeat. You're not the woman I thought you were, he said, bitterness creeping into his tone. No, I agreed. I'm not. I'm the woman you underestimated. The wristwatch reflection flickered on the table again when he exhaled heavily, his breath shuddering through the space between us. It looked like a distorted version of his face staring back at him, fractured by the curved glass. He stared at it for a long time, as if searching for the version of himself he lost somewhere between ambition and betrayal. What happens now? He asked, eventually, his voice nearly breaking. Now, I said, the truth becomes the thing you can't outrun. He didn't argue, didn't shout, didn't deny. He just sat there hollowed out by consequences he never believed would reach him. I turned away, gathering the last of my things into a small bag, listening to the sound of him breathing in uneven intervals, like a man learning for the first time what accountability feels like. As I reached for the doorknob, I looked back one final time. The wristwatch sat abandoned on the table, its reflection no longer distorted by motion, just still, exposed, honest in a way he never was. You once told me reflections are unreliable, I said. But they've shown me more truth than you ever did. I left the apartment before he could answer, stepping into the hallway with a clarity that wrapped around me like a final shield. The payoff wasn't loud. It wasn't triumphant. It was quiet, cold, sharp, exact. And as I walked away, I knew one thing with absolute certainty: the truth had finally come full circle, and for the first time it belonged entirely to me. The safety deposit vault was colder than I expected, a metallic chill that clung to my skin as if the walls themselves were waiting for someone to finally open what had been kept in the dark too long. The clerk led me down a narrow hallway lined with steel drawers, each one silent but heavy with secrets. And when he stopped at box 317 and stepped aside, I felt a strange calm settle over me, a clean stillness that arrived only when the last piece of a puzzle finally comes into view. I slid the key into the lock, the metal turning with a soft, definitive click. And as I pulled the drawer open, a thin line of light fell across the contents, refracting off the surface of a glass photo frame pressed against a manila envelope. The frame was the first thing I touched my fingertips, brushing against the cool pane as the motif resolve whispered through me with eerie precision. The truth shines whole through glass, once shattered reflections settle into clarity. Inside the frame was a photograph I hadn't seen in years. Daniel and me on our first anniversary, leaning against each other, smiling like people who believed promises were enough to build a life on. Behind that smiling version of us, however, was the real revelation the timestamp printed faintly in the lower right corner. The numbers were wrong. They contradicted the story Daniel always told about that day, the version he recited whenever recalling how our marriage started strong. I stared at the printed date, realizing it aligned perfectly with one of the manipulated financial transfers I'd discovered, the earliest one, the one he could never explain. Even our memories had been edited. Beneath the frame lay the manila envelope, heavier than it looked. I lifted it carefully and opened it to find a thick stack of documents, contracts, account statements, and most damningly, a notarized letter Daniel had written but never sent, detailing his intention to reassign all assets to a private trust he'd created months before his first big payout. Trust name DM, Solo Holdings. Effective date. The same date he'd told me we were celebrating new beginnings. He had hidden the papers here because he believed I would never look. Because he believed the truth would stay locked as long as I stayed quiet. But the woman he'd underestimated had become the woman he could no longer outrun. I scanned each page with meticulous care, cross-referencing dates with the timeline I built, and the further I read, the stronger the truth took shape. Daniel hadn't stumbled into betrayal. He had drafted it, outlined it, executed it, and then rewritten our history to make it look inevitable. Emotion didn't rise in me, not anger, not sadness, not even triumph. What I felt was precision. The cold, exact understanding of someone finally seeing the full equation instead of fragments. When I closed the envelope and placed everything back inside the drawer, I took one last look at the photo. The glass surface had a faint, nearly invisible crack along its corner, catching the light in a thin diagonal line, like a scar. It felt symbolic, the final echo of the motif that had followed me through every revelation, fractured truths, bending through glass until the moment they finally aligned. I returned the box to the clerk and walked outside into the late afternoon sun, the city glowing with the warm gold of a day surrendering into evening. My phone buzzed. A message from Lena. The case is filed. He'll be served within the hour. I sent a brief thank you, then tucked my phone away and began walking toward the courthouse steps where I was scheduled to sign the final set of affidavits. Each step felt like shedding something invisible, layers of doubt, fear, confusion, until all that remained was clarity. As I approached the building, I heard hurried footsteps behind me. Daniel's voice cut through the air, breathless and strained. "Claire, wait! Please." I turned slowly. He looked different, defeated in a way no courtroom could manufacture. His shoulders sagged, his hair disheveled, his eyes rimmed with the sleeplessness that comes from watching a life slip through fingers that once held everything too tightly. "We need to talk," he said. "No," I replied. "You need to listen." He swallowed hard. "I made mistakes. I know that, but you blindsiding me with a legal ambush. After everything, after us, you didn't leave me a marriage to protect," I said. "You left me a maze built from lies." He stepped closer, desperation bleeding through his facade. "I was scared," he repeated, voice cracking. "Scared I'd lose control. Scared you'd take half of everything I worked for. You tried to make sure I got nothing I said. You tried to make sure I disappeared." His face contorted with a mix of shame and anger. "I didn't think you'd understand. I understood more than you ever realized." He dragged a trembling hand down his face. "We can undo this. We can fix it. I can move the money back." "It's not about the money," I interrupted. "It never was." He stared at me confused, as though every script he rehearsed no longer applied. "Then what do you want?" he whispered. "I want the truth to stand," I said. "And it does. Without you. Without your stories. Without your control." He flinched as if I'd struck him. "Claire, I loved you." I believe I said carefully, "You loved the version of me who didn't look too closely at the numbers." The breeze swept between us, carrying the faint scent of rain from a storm forming somewhere beyond the skyline. Daniel's next words came out as a plea. "Can we at least talk somewhere private without attorney, without witnesses?" "Our entire marriage was a private place you filled with secrets," I said. "This part doesn't get to be private." His lips trembled. "I don't know how to do this without you. You should have thought about that before choosing a future that didn't include me." His eyes glistened, but I didn't move closer, didn't comfort him, didn't try to soften what needed to remain sharp. "Goodbye, Daniel," I said. This time the reflection in the mirror was right. We were already over. I turned and walked up the courthouse steps, the glass doors reflecting my figure back at me, whole unbroken, fully visible. For the first time in years, the reflection matched the truth. Inside the lobby, Lena handed me the final page to sign, and as the pen touched the paper, I felt a calm clarity settle over me like a final seal. When I stepped outside again, Daniel was gone. The storm clouds above the city had begun to break thin beams of sunlight piercing through in sharp, angled lines, light splitting across glass but no longer distorting anything. As I walked toward the street, the truth settled into its final form. He had tried to erase me, but in the end, he erased himself. And I finally was free.